You might complain about endless Zoom calls, spreadsheets, or a boss who emails at midnight, but at least your job doesn't involve climbing inside a smoke-filled chimney, wading through human waste in the sewers, or collecting dog poop with your bare hands just to survive. Welcome to Victorian England, a time of fancy dresses, big parties, and shiny top hats for the rich, but absolute misery for the poor. In this video, we're uncovering 7 of the worst jobs ordinary people were forced to do just to stay alive, and stick around until the very end, because the final job wasn't just disgusting or dangerous, it crossed the line into cold-blooded crime. Let's begin with one of the most infamous jobs of the era, and one of the cruelest. Victorian homes depended on fireplaces. They were cozy, yes, but dangerous too. If soot built up, it could spark a fire that burned the entire house down, so the chimneys had to be cleaned constantly. But here's the catch. Chimneys were often so narrow that a grown man couldn't fit inside. So who did they send up? Children. Picture a boy of 6 or 7 years old, barefoot, thin as a stick, being forced to crawl up a dark brick tunnel. No rope, no protection, just his elbows and knees scraping the sides as he climbed higher and higher. Their skin wore down to bloody wounds. After enough climbs, those wounds hardened into rough, permanent scars. Every inhale filled their lungs with soot. Many sweeps developed what we'd now call chronic lung disease, and some didn't live long enough to reach their teenage years. Sometimes their small bodies got stuck in the chimney, trapped with no way out. And in the cruelest cases, masters lit a fire at the bottom, burning smoke upward to force the child to climb. Now, if climbing up a chimney sounds awful, imagine going the opposite way, down into the sewers. This was the world of the Toshers, men who scavenged through the underground tunnels of London looking for treasure. Every day, coins, spoons, even jewelry slipped through drains and ended up in the sewers. Toshers strapped lanterns to their chests for light and carried long poles to poke through the filth. But the dangers were everywhere: poisonous gases that could knock a man unconscious, collapsing walls that buried workers alive, and sudden floods from the Thames that swept men away in seconds. Rats roamed in packs, feeding on whatever floated by. Toshers fought them off with poles or boots. Yet despite all of this, some earned more in a night than a week of honest labor. Not everyone risked the sewers. Some searched the muddy banks of the River Thames instead. These scavengers were known as Mudlarks. They were usually children, barefoot, poor, desperate. At low tide, the riverbanks turned into wide plains of sticky, foul-smelling mud. Mudlarks searched for scraps of wood, coal, rags, broken metal, or even coins. But danger lurked. Tides rose fast. Children sank in mud and drowned. And even small cuts could turn deadly in the polluted water. For most, mudlarking was survival. Even a single lump of coal could mean warmth for one night. Now for one of the strangest and most humiliating jobs, the pure finders. These workers collected dog poop from the streets of London. It sounds bizarre, but tanneries needed it to soften animal hides and make leather usable. So pure finders carried buckets and scooped droppings, often with bare hands. The smell was unbearable. People crossed streets to avoid them. The pay was pitiful, barely enough for food, yet without them, London's leather trade would have collapsed. Inside match factories, young girls, some teenagers worked long hours, dipping sticks into white phosphorus. Matches were essential, but the chemical was deadly. The fumes poisoned their bodies. At first came headaches and coughing, then something worse: phossy jaw, bones in the jaw, rotted teeth fell out, and faces swelled painfully. Some workers' faces even glowed faintly in the dark. For many it was a death sentence. But the demand for matches never stopped, so factory owners kept hiring. Victorian Britain was overrun with rats. They spread disease and raided food supplies, creating steady work for rat catchers. These men trained dogs or used ferrets to flush rats from nests in homes, warehouses, even ships. But instead of killing them all, many catchers sold the rats to fighting pits, where crowds bet on how quickly dogs could slaughter them. One famous catcher, Jack Black, supplied thousands of live rats. He even claimed he worked for Queen Victoria. Rat catchers faced danger every day. One bite could be deadly. Yet some were strangely admired as heroes of pest control. Our final job began before Queen Victoria, but haunted her reign: resurrectionists. Medical schools needed cadavers, but by law, they could only use executed criminals, and there weren't enough. So grave robbers dug up fresh corpses and sold them to doctors. They had a routine: dig quickly, leave the clothes behind, and bag the body. Families responded with guards, iron cages over graves, and even armed patrols. Then came the infamous Burke and Hare, who stopped digging altogether and murdered 16 people to sell their bodies. Burke was executed, and his corpse dissected in public. Grim irony at its peak. The Anatomy Act of 1832 finally allowed doctors to use unclaimed pauper bodies, ending the trade. Still, the terror lingered. People guarded graves well into Victorian times. So the next time you feel trapped in another dull meeting or overwhelmed by emails, remember this. At least you're not crawling up chimneys, scavenging through sewage, or digging up graves in the middle of the night. For the poor of Victorian England, work wasn't about passion, purpose, or career ladders. It was about one thing only: surviving another day. If you found this glimpse into the darkest jobs of history eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss more stories from the past, some shocking, some stranger than fiction.